Our preaching text today comes from the book of 1 Kings, and there's a couple things that have happened since last week's preaching text. King David was the king over a unified Israel. All 12 tribes were together. And then his son Solomon followed him. And here we are, right after King Solomon has died, and his son Rehoboam is going to become king. Now, Rehoboam sounds a lot like Jeroboam, who is another person in this story, and a very important one. In staff earlier this week, we joked that maybe it would be easier to call them Jerry and Ray, because there's too many Boams. But just know that Rehoboam is King Solomon's son, and Jeroboam you'll hear more about. A reading from 1 Kings chapter 12. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all of Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. But then when Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard of it, for Jeroboam was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. Then Jeroboam remained in Egypt, and then they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came before Rehoboam and said, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke, and we will serve you." Rehoboam said to them, "Go away for 3 days, and then come back to me." So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the older men who had attended his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, "How do you advise me to answer these people?" They answered him, "If you will be a servant to this people, and serve them, and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever." But King Rehoboam disregarded that advice that the older men had given him, and instead consulted with the young men who had grown up with him and who now attended him. Rehoboam said to them, "What advice do you have that we answer this people who have said to me, 'Lighten the load that your father has put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him said, "This is what you should say to those people who spoke to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but lighten it for us.' This is what you should say: 'My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Now, whereas my father laid a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on that 3rd day, as the king had asked. The king answered the people harshly. He disregarded the advice that the older men had given him, and he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men. "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, because it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord to fulfill his word that the Lord had spoken by Elijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam, son of Nebat. When all Israel saw that the king would not listen, then the people answered the king and said, "What share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in this son of Jesse. So back to your tents, O Israel. Look now on your own house, O David." So Israel went away to their tents. But Rehoboam reigned over the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and resided there. He went out from there and built Penuel. Then Jeroboam said to himself, "Now the kingdom may well revert and go back to the house of David. If this people continues to go up and offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn turn again to their master King Rehoboam of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam." So Jeroboam took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. He said to his people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. One of the interesting things about the narrative lectionary is encountering texts that I wouldn't normally. This is one of those. 1 Kings in general is one of those books that I've never taken too keen of an interest in. It's full of stories about nations and kings and rulers, and also about the wars and fighting and drama between them. Stories that we wouldn't normally come across in other lectionaries. And this story comes at the end of the united kingdom of Kings David and Solomon. The 12 tribes were all together, and they were very busy together as well. King David's son Solomon built a glorious temple and many other building projects during his reign. Or rather, maybe he didn't build them himself personally, but he had some forced laborers to build those for him. So King Solomon, back before this story, assigned this person named Jeroboam the task of overseeing all of that labor for all of these building projects. And then one day a prophet came in and took the fancy clothes off of Jeroboam and ripped them into 12 pieces. After he ripped them up, he gave 10 of them back to Jeroboam. Why? Because God is going to do something here, it seems. The kingdom will be divided. Now, this prophecy scared King Solomon to the point that he plotted to kill Jeroboam. So Jeroboam fled away to Egypt, and that's where we find him at the beginning of our story today. So Jeroboam comes out of Egypt knowing what kinds of demands and expectations are being placed on the workers and on the people of Israel because of how close he was to them. He saw their struggle. He oversaw it. And it seems that his heart maybe was softened toward them a little bit. So he joins them in asking that their load might be lightened. Now, what an interesting connection to the Exodus story. Jeroboam comes out of Egypt, hint, hint. And after that, after he had already been in King Rehoboam's court, kind of like how Moses was in Pharaoh's court, it makes me wonder, how did these people view Jeroboam? As like a kind of Moses-like figure? I just wonder. So Jeroboam comes to the new king and advocates for the people. And now King Rehoboam asks the wise men for advice, who say, listen and serve them. Love mercy. Be kind and compassionate. Lighten their load. But King Rehoboam ignores that, opting instead for the hardened and cruel advice of his buddies. When Rehoboam presents that answer to the people, they turn around and go home. You are no longer our king. And then Jeroboam goes with them out of this state of oppression with violent words and promises into their own lands. And then they make him their king, actually. So now we have a King Rehoboam and a King Jeroboam. But Jeroboam gets caught up in the same kinds of fears that plague so many. He's afraid of losing his subjects when they go to worship in Jerusalem. Afraid so much to the point he's worried that they will kill him when they come back. So he builds idols as alternatives for worship. To keep himself safe, really. It seems that his heart was hardened toward God out of fear. Now, a few weeks ago, we encountered the 10 Commandments. The very first commandment "You shall not have other gods before me." What is this? A god is anything to which we put our whole heart and trust. Right? So we already see Jeroboam erring on day one. So I have a few recommendations for Jeroboam and Rehoboam to think about. Number one, building projects aren't necessarily God. Political safety is not God. And militarism is also not God. You see, there's a section that we jumped over in this story. After Jeroboam leads the people back to the north, then Rehoboam in the south amasses an army. This wasn't in our reading, but it follows the story. Another prophet steps in and stops Rehoboam from attacking, encouraging Rehoboam to trust God and God's plan instead of his own military might. Do not put your trust in things that are not God. Does this happen at any point in our history? Well, back in the 1500s, Martin Luther raised a voice against some immoral practices that were going on within the Catholic Church. See, the Catholic Church had a lot of building projects, and they needed funding, and Martin Luther's Reformation was a critique that the church was more focused on its building projects than on its own people. There's certainly a parallel between our story today and the history of the church. And even though Jeroboam is the one to raise that voice like Martin Luther, he ends up making the same kinds of mistakes that he was critiquing, setting up idols in the north and in the south. There's not really a good guy in our story today. There's not really a lot of good news here. So I've been looking for some other sources that can help me make sense of this story. So another Bible verse to hold in tandem with this story might be Micah chapter 6, verse 8. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Can we see this verse at play in our text today? I think it's in the voices of the elders, the compassionate counsel, the ones who say, do justice, love mercy, listen to the people, and serve them. Walk humbly with your God. There's a song by a choir composer also that I've been thinking through this text with. It's amazing how music can kind of etch words into your heart and can help you to remember them. The words of this song go, Lord, lead me into paths of peace. Make your way plain before my eyes. Teach me always to listen. Teach me to lead with compassion. For when I come to a place of rest, only by your grace and not by my merit, no praise be mine, then let me keep a heart that still can feel and eyes that still can weep. Let me keep a heart that still can feel and eyes that still can weep. So as I look to this text, I'm thinking, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, and let us keep hearts that still can feel and eyes that still can weep. I see the elders doing this, and Jeroboam too, at least at first. And maybe that's what's good in our story today, but still, there's not a lot of good news in this story or in our world these days. There are a lot of images that I've seen over the last few weeks about the crisis in the Holy Land, reporters on the ground in Gaza, and images of a lot of violence, a result of carpet bombings and just horrible, horrible things. I feel strong temptations at times to look away, and I'm encouraged by others to do that too for mental health reasons. It's really hard to bear witness. That's why it's called bearing witness. It's hard to bear. We may be tempted to turn off a TV and tune things out. But the images of the casualties are doing things to those of us who are paying attention and who are watching, like they did back in the Vietnam War, I imagine. When the public was first made aware of what this kind of violence looks like, a story came out that someone in Washington, D.C. was going to the Capitol building with a lighted candle every day, standing in vigil and protest against violence. And a reporter came to this person and asked, "Why are you doing this? It won't change anything." And the protester responded, "I'm not here to change them. I'm here to keep them from changing me." We could turn song lyrics into a prayer. Lord, lead me into paths of peace. Let me keep a heart that still can feel and eyes that still can weep. Help me to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you, Lord. Our festival day today, Reformation, is often a triumphant sort of festivity. Reformation Day is one we celebrate a shared heritage, that we rejoice and celebrate who we are as Lutherans. We sing the songs of our community, past songs of uplift, songs of courage, as a way of uniting ourselves around what the world could be. So we have two songs that we'll sing later in this service. First, Built on a Rock. Our reformers didn't turn away from the struggles of this world. For example, in the first line of Built on a Rock, even when steeples are falling. But we sing of a world that is rooted in God and in God's promise for a future of flourishing life. And same with A Mighty Fortress. We are grounded in a solid rock, a safe place to stand in God, a mighty fortress, even amid fear and true evil. Our musical tradition gives us an orientation toward God with hope for a better day when children no longer die at the hands of military might. Reformation is a reorientation back toward God, back toward what is right and true and good. So we have these songs to sing. May they orient us back toward who we might become, with God at the center. Amen.